Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe to develop campaign strategies, train engagement staff in leadership and power building, and help you execute your campaign strategies with data-driven tactics and actions. And in 2022, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action, and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. And today's episode is also brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers. Are you an enthusiastic, client-focused lawyer? Morris Blackburn Lawyers are hiring a lawyer, associate or senior associate with experience in personal injuries to join their team in Townsville, Queensland. They offer a safe, supportive and collaborative work environment backed by inclusive leaders and progressive policies. And you'll manage your own file load with support from their team. So are you ready to join them on a journey to extend access to justice for more Australians? Well, if so, apply now at morrisblackburn.com.au/careers. Morris Blackburn, experience you can count on. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast, out every Friday, and we're taping this one on a Friday, so we're leaving a little bit late, and apologies, this episode may actually only get up on Saturday morning. That dives into the progressive campaign issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And on this week's episode, we're joined by my good friend, the federal member for Macnamara Labor's Josh Burns, to talk about the first 2 weeks of the sitting up in Canberra, first sitting week in Canberra for the new Albanese Labor government and all the things that happened in the last 2 weeks. So we'll get a bit of a federal update from Josh. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and leave us a review. And for all the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a late Friday afternoon, leaving this one late. Shot clock is down. Taping on the land of the Wurundjeri people on a shitty, wet afternoon in Melbourne. But joining on the line from the People's Republic, still the People's Republic of Macnamara, 2 from 2, undefeated. Once again, good shabbos to you, Josh Burns.
Stephen Donnelly, it's just an absolute bloody pleasure to be with you this afternoon. No, I'm. It's good to talk to you, and I'm very pleased to be joining the good burgers of Socially Democratic this afternoon.
As the MP for Macnamara once again, I wonder if you thought that your election night experience in 2022 was going to be a lot easier than your election night in 2019 when you first were elected to the seat. Dragged on a little bit longer than you probably anticipated, correct?
In 2019, we knew within about 7 seconds of the first couple of booths coming in that we were going to win the seat. And in 2022, it was clearly going to be a lot tighter. And at no point did I think we were going to lose, but I knew it was going to be tight. And we couldn't claim victory without being for certain that it was mathematically impossible for the Greens to win. And it was in some ways in 2019, my life changed. I got elected to the federal parliament, and it was an amazing feeling, but also the shattering feeling of our movement, the Labor Party, losing an election that we all thought we could win. That was really hard. And then in 2022, whilst I was a little bit sort of unsure about what my future was going to be, I was so proud of seeing a Labor Prime Minister walking and standing confidently in front of the country, ready to take the helm of our government. And it was difficult, it was different, but it also reinforces the fact that politics is unpredictable and you cannot assume anything. There is no such thing as a safe seat. And anyone who thinks they've got a safe seat, anyone who thinks that they can take their community for granted is completely, will one day realise how wrong they are. And
I was going to ask you, what were your key takeaways from this experience of waiting for the results to come in? But it sounds like there's a couple there, a couple of nuggets of wisdom right there.
Well, I do think that you learn from failure more than you learn from success. And, and in some ways, it's sort of this unusual thing that actually more people voted for Labor this time in both the primary vote and the two-party preferred than last time. So we got swings to us on both of those fronts, and yet this election was obviously a lot harder and made us reflect a lot more, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but it's also the reality because of the timing of how long the vote took. I really think that not only in my electorate but across the country, we have to be humble. This wasn't a situation where the Labor Party won every single vote and everyone resoundingly and overwhelmingly in this landslide of a victory said that we like Labor's the only option. I really think that we got enough people to secure a majority government, and that's something that we should be immensely proud of and use it, not waste a moment of this opportunity. But I also think that a lot of people didn't vote for the Labor Party, and we have to be humble about that and think about, well, what things did we get right and what things didn't we get right? What parts of our opponents' arguments really resonated with the Australian people? And I think in Macnamara, I think we didn't have a campaign that came up against us that sort of said that Labor was bad. We had a campaign, especially from the Greens, that said, we're going to be the Labor plus, where, you get Labor plus, we're going to push them to do more. And it was quite a smart campaign. And I thought that they ran a strong campaign. They had a strong candidate. And I don't think we should be shy about saying that. So I think the lessons to be learned are we have to be humble. We have to be appreciative of the votes that we got. But also, I said to people on the election day, even if they didn't take the Labor, especially if they didn't take the Labor how to vote ticket, I said, look, that's totally fine. But I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can to give you some things to think about for the next time you cast your vote. And we take seriously the request for people to choose Labor. We want this opportunity to do important reform for our country, and we're going to give people things to think about as to why they should support us next time. I think we've made a really strong start. I think we're putting ourselves in a good position to hopefully set up a long-term reformist Labor government.
On election night, I made some outrageous predictions, and actually in the weeks leading up to it, that we were going to win Higgins. And I think David Feeney on one of our podcasts tried to laugh me out of my own studio. But I was basing that evidence on insights from your good self, actually, and maybe a couple of field organisers on the ground in Higgins. You were proved right. It was a great result in the neighbouring federal electorate, which has been if the Victoria was the jewel in the crown of the Liberal Party, Higgins is one of the centerpieces of that crown, but it is now a Labor seat. Talk to us about what you saw in Higgins and why we needed to focus our energy and resources in trying to flip that seat.
Well, a few people thought I was a little bit crazy too, so which is not unique to my predictions in Higgins, Stephen. So no, I have obviously lived in and around the inner parts of Melbourne my entire life, and I know the neighbourhood pretty well, and you have a sense of the temperature of people locally, and I do think that the demographics of Higgins were not working for the Liberal Party, or more so, I actually think the Liberal Party were ignoring the demographic trends of places like Macnamara and Higgins and Kooyong and Goldstein and Wentworth and all these other seats. And that only became even more prevalent throughout the election. So I knew that last time Higgins went from 11% to about 3.75%. So huge swing towards the Labor Party under a combined effort of Josh Spiegel and then into Fiona McLeod, who was replaced as the candidate in late 2019, 6 weeks before the election, which is an extraordinary result, right? She was a fantastic, credible candidate. And Bill did a great job of closing that gap in the seat of Higgins. So I only really had 3.7%. I couldn't see how the people of Higgins, highly educated, caring about issues like climate change and equality and standards in the workplace, I couldn't see how people in Higgins were going to be more enamoured with Scott Morrison than they were in 2019. I thought that he was going to disenfranchise more people than he had last time. So it was my calculation that it was going to move away from the Liberal Party. And that didn't mean that we were going to guarantee to win. It just meant that it was going to be hard for the Liberals to hold on to the seat of Higgins. I then went sort of hunting around for a candidate and stumbled across a very impressive doctor by the name of Michelle Ananda-Raja, who I'd been speaking to throughout the pandemic, and who was not only a serious intellect, but also someone who had a bit of political fire, and she had political instincts, and I sort of was talking to her about potentially running in Higgins, and that's kind of where she took over and made history. And I'm proud to have played a role in all of that, but make no mistake, Higgins was won by Dr. Michelle Ananda-Raja and her incredible campaign team, and for the first time in the history of the seat of Higgins, it's now a Labor seat, and that's entirely to her credit and to her hard work. She door-knocked the crap out of that seat. She wore down her pretty cool gold sequin sneakers and walked around and spoke to people, and she tapped into the mood of a really smart, hard-working, forward-thinking electorate that now aligns with the Labor Party.
And backed up with a strong field effort as well. Certainly talking to some of the folks on the ground and also from the field program out of Vic Branch, that they were really, really super proud of the volunteer capacity that they'd built and the mobilisation to support Michelle's candidacy, which was fantastic to see as well, which just goes to prove once again that, conversations on the doors and on the phones, she just votes to Labor.
Well, when you start door-knocking numbers, when your door-knocking numbers are in the thousands, you're talking about significant number of votes that are shifting, and Michelle and her team did just a sensational job, and the model worked. I also think that the product was there, right? I mean, you've got someone who is a migrant who's come to this country, has accomplished professional, made it in the field of medicine, extremely articulate, a campaign that's centered around advanced manufacturing, science, progress, reform. It appealed to the people's sensibilities in Higgins, and then it was the job of the field campaign and Michelle to go out and find every vote, and they did. And I think that formula really worked, and the field campaign worked extremely hard, as did Michelle, and they made history. They did something that no Labor candidate in that seat has ever done before, and that's won. So
it was a great result on the night. Put a bit of a icing on the cake for Labor in terms of winning government. Let's turn to the post-election feel and vibe.
Yep.
And Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, which is a fantastic sentence to say, seems to really be settling into the role as Prime Minister. I just get a feeling that he's a lot more comfortable now than he was in the campaign. I think that, I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but I often speculated about, Kim Beazley, for example. I think he's one of those people that you put down in the list of people who would have made a great Prime Minister, but just couldn't get over the line in the election. Wasn't the greatest on the hustings campaigners. Couldn't necessarily, give us a 6-second TV bite. Kim liked to, he's a smart bloke. Always had a good story to tell. Sometimes he used a couple of big words that no one got really understood what he was talking about in the first place. Albo is the guy that's got into government as Prime Minister, and I think it just suits him so well. He's just so much more relaxed now in front of the media. He knows what he's talking about. He's on message. He's comfortable. He's passionate. He's all doing all the things that we expect from a good Labor Prime Minister.
He's very impressive the way he's eased into the job of Prime Minister, which is an extremely hard job. I mean, to be the Prime Minister of this country is a tough gig, and it's relentless. I don't think he's had a day off yet. I think he's going to have a couple of days off soon, hopefully, just to recharge, because he's had a huge workload, and you need to look after yourself if we're going to be there for a while and have longevity in this government, which I really think we can. I've been impressed with not only his leadership, but also his willingness to allow people to have space to lead in their own portfolios as well. And you think about the team that are assembled around the cabinet table, and there are serious people. There are really competent, serious people who you need to run a government. You can't run a government with one person. You need a team of people, and you need a team of experienced, diverse people who think differently about the world and who come at problems from a different perspective. There is no point having the Mutual Agreement Society running the country, because what you get is something like that looks something like the Morrison government, where power was extremely concentrated. They had 6 blokes sitting around a table telling each other how good a job they were doing, and they came out with some absolutely disastrous outcomes for Australians. What you need is a range and a diversity of views sitting around the table, disagreeing with each other and fighting out arguments, and then making good decisions, detailed decisions in the best interests of the country, and going out and delivering those policy reforms. And I think that will be a lot harder, but a lot more worthwhile in the long run. And I think that the team around the cabinet table has the makings of that, led by someone who is extremely smart and has great political instincts, but more than that, I think fundamentally is a really decent human being and cares a lot about this country, and is going to try and do his absolute best for as long as he's got the gig. And what more can you ask from a Labor Prime Minister?
Indeed. Talk us through this week. I want to get to some of the policy stuff in a moment, but initially, the first sitting week of Parliament, I know it was a fortnight, it can be at times an inspiring week, because everyone makes the new MPs. They've done their O week, they've signed up to the Labor Club table. They've had a few too many drinks one night at the bar, and then it's time to enter into that beautiful building up on top of the hill in Canberra and deliver their first speech. You have done that. I was in the chamber when you made your first speech. Not a great one, but it was okay. No, don't. it was a bad speech. Just hang on a minute. And just hearing everyone's stories, it's a great moment in democracy, I think, and even to see the odd members of the opposition wander in to listen to speeches from some of their opponents, I think it shows a level of civility in our democracy as well. I just want to get a sense from some of the speeches that you heard over the last fortnight that you want to share with our listeners that moved you, and maybe some of our listeners should go and check out those speeches on Hansard.
Well, I do remember you coming up for the first speech, and we had a good night of red wine afterwards. But no, it is a special moment, and I before I go into the speeches, I agree with something you said, Stephen, which is it is a really optimistic week. To hear not only a sense of people, but also, after being in opposition for the last 3 years to now being in government, I can say squarely, and with a little bit of experience, that government is so much better than opposition. Opposition is not where you want to be. We are not a debating society in the Labor Party. We are the party of government. And this has to be our objective, to be in this position, to be able to deliver for the Australian people. That is our raison d'etre, and we have to remain true to it. But beyond that, you then come into this place, you come into the Parliament, and it is amazing to hear the perspectives and the diversity and the stories of people. Michelle did an amazing first speech. You should definitely go and listen to Michelle Ananda-Rajah's. Sally Situ, the new member for Reid, gave a speech that really blew me away. It was compassionate, it was smart, it was thoughtful. Sally was great. Sam Ray gave a strong speech about his foundations. It was like I actually can't think of a first speech that wasn't a really nice reflection of a quality human being, and that's a tribute to it. And on the other side as well, I've tried to come in for some of the other speeches My neighbour, Zoe Daniel, I came and listened to her, and I listened to Allegra Spender as well, who's the new member for Wentworth. And they both gave really, really warm accounts of who they are. I have to say, one of the most powerful speeches I've seen so far was from Senator Jana Stewart. If you haven't seen that speech, that is someone who has a real sense of purpose and and carries a real weight of history on her shoulders. She's someone I really admire, Jana, and she's going to do profound things in our federal parliament. Is going to ruffle feathers on all sides of the parliament, and that's exactly the sort of person you want in there, making the important and historic reform. So, yeah, really impressed with the crop of newbies. In fact, a bit scarily impressed, given how talented they are and how quickly they'll be coming after all of our second term positions. But no, they're great. They're great, and I'm really proud of them, and they're going to do great things for our party.
Brilliant. We've got Senator Jana Stewart on the podcast coming up in a couple of weeks' time as well. So I'm actually looking forward to having a chat to Jana. You said in your initial remarks to that question how much better it is to be on the government benches than in opposition. One, I'm assuming the seats are far more comfortable on that side of the chamber. But talk us through the first caucus meeting without breaking caucus confidentiality and solidarity. What was the tone and tenor of Albo's remarks in that first caucus meeting as now the government? And also, just remind me, does the Labor caucus room move because you're now in government in Parliament?
Yeah. So there's a government caucus room and an opposition party room as well. So yeah, we've moved rooms. Down to the other corridor, which is actually closer to my office, so that's good. It takes me less time to walk there. But no, I mean, one thing that Albo has stressed when talking to our team is that he appreciates the role that we empower him to do, and he really appreciates the fact that this is not something that that you just take. This is something that's given, and that he feels a deep sense of gratitude for that, as well as he feels a deep sense of gratitude that in return there has been a real sense of unity and a real sense of purpose within the group to want to get to achieve government, and that we wouldn't have achieved government without that sense of teamwork and unity, that we have to work together. And the longevity of this Labor government, how much reform and how much we can set up our country and do the things that we are all involved in the Labor movement to do, will depend on how we conduct ourselves, how we work together, how we manage disagreements, and how we work together with that sense of unity and purpose. We are the movement that grew out of collectivism, the bringing many voices to work together and stand up and speak for the interests of the individual. And it is through that collectivism that the Australian Labor Party has been able to bring reform. It's a difficult process because you have to come together and have those disagreements. It's better if they're done behind closed doors sometimes. But then once you come to that agreement, you try and make the absolute best decision you can for the working people of Australia. And I think that sense of unity was reflected in the comments made by the Prime Minister, and that's something that we have to hold on to as the federal Labor team, and it's something that I take really seriously as well.
I know we can't speak for Prime Minister Albanese's what was going through his mind when he made that address to the opening of Parliament, but he obviously got a little bit emotional in some of his remarks. And he's been around politics for a very, very long time. He was a minister in the Rudd-Gillard years as well.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if in his back of his mind was, shit, I finally got to this position. Not only am I saying to you guys, don't waste it, but he's probably saying to himself, let's not waste it as well. I mean, what was your reflections when you heard him make that speech in Canberra to kick off the first sitting week?
I mean, like, Anthony is an emotional guy. He is someone who I think feels the issues that confront our country, and he is sincere. He's not, he is authentic. There's a great podcast by Don Watson recently where he talks about the transition between the complete lack of any form of authenticity from the previous prime minister into a guy that was quivering on election night because he felt the sense of responsibility. I mean, this is something that Anthony Albanese, when he talks about government literally, he understands that government changes lives because it changed his. And I do think he believes in good government, and I do think he believes in doing the best and having good people involved in government. So I also think that his actual the speech that really moved me was his speech at the Gama Festival, where for the first time in a while, I stopped and listened to a prime minister, and it's not just because I know the guy. I stopped and listened to him, and I heard a sense of vulnerability. I heard a sense of a person wanting to take the country somewhere, a sense of purpose, of risk, of ambition, not just for himself, but for people who have been wronged by this country, for our first Australians. And I thought that speech was extremely, extremely vulnerable and extremely authentic and worthwhile as a result. And I was really proud of that speech, I have to say. So, because even though you're the prime minister, like, what are you using the job for? And you've got to sometimes make really difficult decisions about the pace of reform that you put into this, put before the Australian people. It's a really difficult. That's probably the most difficult thing you have to do is, like, what are we actually going to prioritise the resources of government on? Because we can't do everything. So what are we going to do, and how are we going to bring people with us and manage all of that? And I think that speech at Gama really reflected someone who was willing to take a bit of a risk on his own leadership in order to better the country. And that's exactly the sort of leadership that we need.
And the leadership we've been missing for a better part of a decade as well.
Oh.
What are some of, talk about getting on with good government, what are some of the things that you've already noticed in the first 2 weeks coming out of the government in terms of legislation and creating change that you want to sort of talk about on the show now?
Well, the most obvious one is the climate bill. That's something that really, it was, I was in the parliament where Zali Steggall put forward a worthwhile bill, which was, worthwhile the parliament debating, which didn't even get onto the floor because Morrison refused to allow it. Helen Haines put forward a bill that was a really reasonable bill that was about renewable energy zones in regional Australia, trying to get investment into renewable energy in regional Australia. And Morrison didn't let that even be debated on the floor. And the whole time Labor was saying, well, at least let it be debated, like at least bring it on for consideration. And it clearly showed two things. One is that you need control of the floor of the House of Representatives in order to get things done. And winning government matters because without winning government, people like Scott Morrison control the agenda. And those reforms didn't happen because there wasn't the numbers on the floor of the House of Representatives to make them happen. Well, that's changed. And now we had, in the first week of Parliament, Prime Minister Albanese and Chris Bowen, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, bring forward legislated net zero climate bill, which does a whole range of things, including all of the different government agencies, that spend money, Infrastructure Australia, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, the North Australia Infrastructure Fund, like all the big levers of public investment, all are now geared towards our climate targets. And that's a profound focusing and direction of government that this bill did, as well as boost the Climate Change Authority so that government's getting the best advice and then making that advice transparent and the minister reporting back on the progress of that advice. So this was a big week, a big reform, a big direction setting of the government happened in week one introduced in week one and passed in the House of Reps week 2, and it'll pass the Senate next time they meet. Like that matters, and that only happens when you change government, and it only happens when Labor's in charge. Like that's That's what happens when you vote Labor. The other thing that's also that the other sorts of bills that have already gone through have been. You want to ask a question on that?
Yeah, I do actually, because it's just interesting that I think ever since the Greens voted down the CPRS, climate policy has become the third rail of Australian politics, particularly for the Labor Party. And just sort of reading into some of the reports during the week about the internals within the Greens about whether they're going to vote it up or down and in the House of Reps was interesting. And if they'd voted it down, I would have thought to myself, oh, God, here we go again. But they didn't. And I think that they've seen the shifting winds within the Australian community. Because I think that if they voted it down again, the Australian public would have sort of said, fool me once, shame on me, before me twice, shame on you, to quote George W. Is the third rail analogy now dead? Like, does this now give Labor the I guess, I don't want to say the word courage, but does it give it the momentum now to really be quite aggressive on climate policy going forward with a whole bunch of things that probably we didn't do in the Rudd-Gillard era and kind of fucked us for a while?
Well, I mean, the Greens were never going to vote against that climate bill. I mean, there's a lot of dancing around. I actually bumped into Adam Bant in the airport and I said, mate, you dragged the press club you dragged the whole press corps out to the press club to tell them that you were voting for our bill. Bravo. That's a pretty impressive move to just sort of say, hey,
Yes.
everyone, I'm going to talk to you for an hour. And by the way, the only thing that you're interested in is that we're going to support Labor's bill. Well, of course you're going to support Labor's bill. Now, I don't underestimate for a second that the Greens don't have some kooky characters in their party room that probably wanted to vote this down, but it would have been politically idiotic for them to do so. And I think it was I don't think the Greens, if they're at all half serious, that they could ever consider doing things like that. But they are now in the situation where if the Liberal Party decides to not vote for something, then the other pathway will be the Greens plus an independent through the Senate. And that means the Greens are going to have to make hard decisions about the future of the country, and they're going to have to be a part of decisions of government, just in the same way the Liberal Party will be in opposition. So that comes with extra responsibility, and clearly that was played out pretty publicly in the Greens kind of, muddling around on this question. But putting that aside, I do think it's also, kind of worth pointing out from a strategic point of view that it's extraordinary that you've got a Liberal Party who lost 6 seats to, an independent, 2 seats to the Greens, I think another 10 seats to the Labor Party or something like that, and yet they still voted against climate action. What are they like? What? You've just lost 18 seats, and now you're none of which to a party that was offering less climate action than what you were putting forward. It clearly was one of the most bloody ham-fisted political messages the electorate sent the Liberal Party, and these clowns have just completely said, sorry, we're not interested in listening to you. And maybe it's Peter Dutton's misreading of the Australian electorate. Maybe it's just a reflection of the groupthink that reflects the modern Liberal Party. Or maybe it's just these people are the voices that have been kicked out of the Liberal Party are the people who actually are aware of the sensitivities around these issues. But goodness me, that is a big call from the Liberal Party to say, we don't care about your views on climate action to, the 18 seats that they lost or whatever it was. So, wow, I was blown away by that. And if that's what they're going to be dishing up, then that's significant, and we'll have to work with that. But I was astonished that harder heads didn't prevail on the Liberal Party.
I guess the only way to test that is then to put up some legislation around gender equity or government accountability, because they were the other two issues that kind of gave them a bit of a whack in the back of the head in those seats, certainly in the inner east of Melbourne and Sydney. Can I get your thoughts on others? I interrupted you before you were about to sort of talk about some of the other bigger ticket items that you guys brought in this week.
A friend of the podcast, the Minister for Aged Care and Sport, Annika Wells, did.
Crushing it this week.
Oh yeah, no, she's very comfortable in the role, but she's doing a great job, and we're all really proud of her. But she brought forward legislation that answered 19 recommendations of the Royal Commission, and really important ones, including around 24-hour nurses. It's a big job to try and be able, recruit the sort of nursing numbers that we're going to need, and she's given that a big kickstart. So, as well as a number of other reforms in the aged care sector. So that's something that we're all really proud of. The other thing that Tony Burke introduced was 10 days family and domestic violence leave, so that if there is a situation where someone is facing, the absolute unconscionable family or domestic violence, that they don't have to, they can have the support from their workplace, including casual workers. So that's something that took a lot of work, and Tony Burke was absolutely correct in saying that he was the one who got to introduce that bill, but the work and the advocacy of not only the trade union movement, but literally thousands and thousands of women on behalf of other predominantly women victims is a really important thing to do, as well as a range of other bits of legislation that is actually a part of a government that's trying to do things. And I remember in the last couple of weeks of the Morrison government, we're all sitting around doing sort of take note motions on the budget. It was getting pretty dry, except for this ridiculous squeeze on the religious discrimination bill that Morrison sort of broke his own party over. It's like there's real legislation, and there's more coming. There's a lot more coming. A lot of work's being done for the September sittings, including some big reforms. So yeah, it's really exciting. And leaving Parliament, I haven't felt like this in opposition, where you feel a sense of purpose and a sense of reform and as I said, we are not a debating society. The Labor Party is there to govern, and we're there to do important reform for our country, and yeah, I'm proud of the start we've made.
It's been a great 2 weeks, and a fantastic, as you said, a fantastic start by the Albanese Labor government. If we can just experience the satisfaction of a thing called Schadenfreude for one moment. I remember
not us, Stephen, not us.
Well, certainly I will anyway. If you want to jump into the hot water, by all means. I remember in 1996 when Labor lost government for the first time, basically through my living memory. 1983, I was 8 when Bob Hawke became Prime Minister. So I basically grew up in an era of Labor governments, and seeing that very first question time after 13 years of a Labor government, seeing the Labor Party sit on the opposition benches and seeing John Howard at the dispatch box on the other side just was an absolute. And I wasn't even a member of the Labor Party caucus. I was just a rank and file party member in Young Labor, and it was a kick in the pills. I looked at it and went, "Oh, this looks shit. This is really depressing stuff." It's kind of like seeing your favorite team get beat. However, this time around, the shoe was on the other foot. Tell me, what were the faces across the chamber for the first week? And I know Scott Morrison didn't even turn up. He went on holiday.
Yeah, he came this week though. He didn't say much, Scott. Yeah, look, I mean, I do think the Liberal Party's in a pretty dark place, to be honest. I mean, I do. I think it's a long way back for the Liberal Party. At the same time, I also think that we can't be complacent about the future of the Labor government. I mean, we have to earn every election, and we have to earn it with trust and sincerity and effort, and that comes with being a good government. And yeah, I don't think we can rest on our laurels for 1 second, but I do think the Liberal Party's in a dark place. I mean, what's their pathway back to government? They've this week, like how are they winning back Higgins by voting against climate legislation? How are they how are they sending signals to the Liberal voters who have literally voted for them for a generation, and this election they said no more? We're going to send you a message. How are they speaking to those people in their heartland seats by voting against climate legislation? I mean, I just think they are. There's a lot of middle-aged Morrison leftovers sitting on that front bench who probably all reckon they're all doing a great job in the first couple of weeks of holding the government to account. But the truth is that they haven't changed much since the last election, I don't think. And I'm not sure they're reading this electorate that well. I'm not going to give them too much more of my insights on that. Not that they're right or wrong, but that's for them to figure out. I just think they're in a dark place, and it's a long way back, and they need a lot of soul searching. And at the same time, if we stay humble, and if we don't think that this next election is a given, but rather something that each and every day we have to do our best and deliver for the Australian people, that this could be an era of proper reformist long-term Labor governments. And that's the thing that sets up our country. It set us up for 30 years of economic growth after Hawke and Keating, and that's the thing that will hopefully deliver the prosperity in this new clean energy era and generation that we're going to be heading in towards. That's the thing that's going to help drive prosperity. If we invest in the skills, we invest in the science, the turning science into jobs, we invest in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, we invest in higher wages, better skills, re-level the industrial relations framework so that we give workers more power, we make housing more affordable, we actually do our bit on the international stage of repairing relationships and tackling climate change. We can bring in and usher in an era of generational prosperity, and that's the role of Labor, to be forward thinking. And if we stay humble, Stephen, we can achieve that.
It sounds like a good plan, Josh. I look forward to seeing you guys execute that over the course of the next 3 years.
Yeah. Let's hope we don't look back at this podcast and go, "Oh, gee, that was a good start." No, it is, and I feel a real sense of optimism. I genuinely do, mate. And I'm reminded why I joined this movement. Elections are bloody hard, and it was hard in Macnamara. We had $1 million thrown against us, and that was we had to absorb all of that. And I had strong candidates and a pretty negative campaign coming at us, and it was trying for my team and for my family. But like, I believe in this movement. We all believe. You can't be involved in this if you don't believe in it. And I hope that we don't lose sight of that while in government, because after experiencing opposition, Labor governments are what matter, and what they do even more so.
I know you got to run. It's Friday Arvo, and you got family things to do. Quick question though. We always finish off with some hoops chat. Not that I want to talk too much after the season ended for my beloved Boston Celtics. I will tell you this though.
The evil empire. You're talking about the evil empire acquiring Kevin Durant potentially.
Who? Sorry, I haven't seen. Where's Durant going?
Well, he's in discussions with the Celtics at the moment.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're trading away Jaylen Brown for a 31-year-old aging legend of the sport, but I wouldn't break up the two Jays.
I don't know. I think they'll work around it. I think they'll bring the three of them: Tatum, Brown, and Durant.
They said they wanted. Brooklyn said they wanted Jaylen Brown.
Sure, but if Durant wants to trade, like, he's going. Anyway,
I don't think I want him on my team. I was just going to say I watched the final game 6. I didn't get to see. I was flying to Europe for work, but I thought, I'll just download it when I get to halfway and watch it on the flight for the last bit. But NBA, the boffins at the NBA app store, who were so quick to try to sell their merchandise, a pop-up came up on my screen that said, "Buy all the Golden State Warriors champions gear." Yeah. And it did me a favor actually, but I kind of wanted to watch it because I think through losing, you then experience the joy of winning, a bit like in politics.
You learn a lot more from failure than you do from success. But no, I'm looking forward to this season. I'm looking forward to Dyson Daniels. I'm looking forward to Josh Giddey. I'm looking forward. I mean, I genuinely hope Ben Simmons gets himself right. Like, he's such a talent. I like seeing him play, although I think I think the Brooklyn window is closed without Durant and Paddy. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to this season of NBA. I still reckon, God, like, how incredible is Klay Thompson? I mean, Steph Curry, right? Steph Curry is a star, right? They won with, they don't win the championship without Steph Curry. But Klay Thompson, like, his knee was completely cooked, and he is still, his match fitness just increased and increased. And Jordan Poole was a great third option for them, but
I think Jordan Poole was what did it.
I
He was scoring in the games we lost. He was the one who was their second option. We'll get more points. They will get more points out of him than anyone else.
Yeah, Klay had some big games. I mean, they're literally, you got three guys under 6'6" just dropping trays from beyond the arc, and that's like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson have changed basketball, and no one's been able to do it quite like them. And full credit to two guys who are not the most athletic characters on the court, but two of the best all-time shooters that we will ever see.
Yeah. And mental toughness. I think that was the other thing that got them over the line. They've got so much experience. They've been there before.
They've got a bit of Donnelly about them, real.
I don't think anyone's ever said Stephen Donnelly has mental toughness.
I'm saying it right here.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Josh Burns, lovely to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show. You had a crazy 2 weeks. Still appreciate that. I know our audience appreciates that. We wish you and the caucus the best of luck for the next sitting week coming up, and continue to crush it on behalf of the people of Australia.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button, and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.